Holy shit. We just got some big news about the Final Fantasy VII Remake series. The biggest being that it will officially be a trilogy of games. That is what I've been wanting since 2020, with Part 2 specifically ending at this insane cliffhanger. And while I didn't really show that spoiler, it is time to drop a spoiler warning. You should only watch this video if you've played through the original Final Fantasy VII, and it helps to have some knowledge of the FF7 compilation, especially Crisis Core. Now that we have the OG fans left, let's get into it. In this video, I'm going to present a theory about how Zack will be used in FF7 Rebirth that might seem a little strange. In fact, I assume some of you might find it disappointing, but I have good reason to believe that this is a very plausible journey for Zack in Part 2, and one that I can almost guarantee you haven't seen anywhere else, especially because I live in theory holes and I haven't seen it myself. As someone who watches entirely too many videos about what's happening in the FF7 Remake series, I've noticed that it seems to be a foregone conclusion that Zack will play not just a big role in the story, but a big role in the main party's journey through Rebirth. The primary issue with almost all the theories I've heard so far is that they seem to be wanting to fit some overarching desire. For example, have Zack help Aerith, or team up with Cloud, or take over the party when Cloud becomes lost in the livestream. And that makes sense. After all, why bring Zack back into the mix if not to use him in some way that satisfies us as fans? But all of the theories I've seen so far don't answer two big questions. Number one, what is the impact of Zack on the main conflict between Cloud and Sephiroth? Number two, what would motivate Zack to end up on the same path as the main party, creating the opportunity for him to impact their journey? Before we dive deep into either question, you need to do some level setting on one thing. As you've seen, I haven't asked the question, what will merge Zack's timeline with Cloud's timeline? There's a reason. As of about a year ago, I was convinced that there were two timelines, and looked at anyone who believed that there was only one timeline like they had two heads. It was not only my own interpretation of the ending of Part 1, but it was the predominant interpretation spread across the internet, especially after Maximilian Dood appeared on spoiler mode with Easy Allies and made a convincing case for two timelines. But it truthfully didn't take that much to be convinced. All it took was the existence of a different version of Stamp the Dog to convince us all that there was more than one timeline. After all, the version of Stamp we see throughout the game is a beagle, and the version of Stamp that appears when Zack survives is a terrier. That is practically Multiverse 101. Differences in core elements of the world equal different timelines. But after digging into more lore videos and discussions, I've become convinced that there is only one timeline. For the uninitiated, here's a TLDR on how there may be one timeline instead of two. There are much longer dives into this topic, and I suggest watching them, but I don't think either of us have 2.5 hours now. So here's the gist. Take yourself back to the end of the highway at the end of chapter 18. At that moment, Sephiroth rips a hole through space and time that the party walks through. Why did he do that? Why did he have to take the party into a different plane of existence called the Singularity? To fight the Whispers? I mean, we'd been fighting the Whispers all game in our reality anyway, and nobody could even see them. Granted, we ended up fighting Big Whisper Daddy, but I'm not entirely convinced that was the reason. Instead, it was to remove our characters from the one and only timeline and have them defeat the Whisper God, so that when we left the Singularity and returned to the world, we didn't return to our timeline as we left it. Instead, when we defeated the Whispers of Fate, we undid all of their interventions in the past, present, and future, meaning the one and only timeline was rewritten or remade. That remake of the timeline meant that many things that happened in the past never happened, including everything from Zack's death to even the hiring of the graphic designer that made Stamp into a beagle. In the remade timeline, Stamp is a terrier, hence what some Final Fantasy content creators now refer to as the Terrier timeline. With that level set out of the way, let's dive into the first question that helps unpack what might happen with Zack moving forward. But wait, what if Zack's dead? Well, he's not. He's alive. Moving on. Question number one. What is the impact of Zack on the main conflict between Cloud and Sephiroth? As I detailed in my first video on this channel, I've thought a lot about FF7 Remake. While my initial guttural reaction to the end of Part 1 wasn't negative, I was definitely a bit scared. I wasn't scared of the Remake series changing things, I was afraid of them breaking the story, and the thing that made that most likely was the survival of Zack. The reason his survival threatens to break the story is because the foundational element of Final Fantasy VII's narrative is that the hero is an unreliable narrator, and his mistaken memory is used and exploited by the villain so much that our once cocksure hero believes himself to be nothing more than a weak, mind-controlled puppet that literally begs the person he believes is his creator to give him a number, to make him nothing more than a failed experiment. Because of his fractured mind, he ends up fully serving and helping Sephiroth enact his ultimate plan of summoning Meteor. If Zack were to meet Cloud in the party early in the story, or if Cloud were to remember the truth about who Zack is before the live stream sequence with Tifa, Cloud's mind would no longer be susceptible to Sephiroth's control, because Sephiroth only takes hold of Cloud once he has Cloud doubting who he is in the Whirlwind Maze. For those who don't remember, that's when Sephiroth creates an illusion, where he shows Cloud and Tifa the true version of the Nibelheim flashback, and successfully convinces Cloud to second-guess his own memories. Now, is it possible that Sephiroth has a completely different plan now? Certainly. That's probably why the most recent trailer asked the question, what is Sephiroth's endgame? But if Sephiroth's plan isn't to puppeteer Cloud once again, then why did Part 1 fixate on Cloud's broken mind so many times? In fact, it's arguably an even greater part of the Midgar story in Remake, considering how much Sephiroth has inserted himself into the first part of the game. Let's take a look at what FF7 Remake's co-director said in a recent interview. Question. Fans who played the original FF7 were very surprised to see Sephiroth appear so early in the game and taunt Cloud. Why did the team decide to add Sephiroth into the story so early? Is it a way of showing us Cloud's vulnerable side early on? Answer. There was the intention to show the effect that a most likely imagined Sephiroth had on Cloud's mind at an early stage, but his earlier appearance was also because his existence had a massive influence on the world of Remake itself. This implies that Sephiroth appearing through Part 1 is an intentionally different action taken by Sephiroth than in the original game. He's not just messing with Cloud earlier in the story because we needed to see Sephiroth in Part 1, he's showing up earlier for a reason. I'm sure there are some of you thinking, but didn't the Rebirth trailer already include a line of dialogue that proves Cloud remembers Zack? Kind of, but you will notice that he's simply remembering that he and Zack were in some location together. He's still not sure who he is or what happened to him. There isn't evidence yet that he wholly remembers Zack. So having established that Cloud fully remembering who Zack is would fundamentally break the connection and conflict between Cloud and Sephiroth, brings me to my next question. Question number 2. What would motivate Zack to end up on the same path as the main party, creating the opportunity for him to impact their journey? To start, let's quickly review the top 3 theories I've seen on how Zack and the party would meet, some even from my favorite content creators. Number 1. Zack meets the party in Gongaga. There's certainly some logic here, since he could conceivably go to his hometown after being unable to find Aerith in Midgar. Of the 3 theories, this is, logistically, the most likely way they could cross paths. But if they decide to go this route, it would effectively clear up Cloud's mind because Zack could literally tell him the truth. It would seem to undercut a major question in the Rebirth trailer. What is fact and what is fiction? If we were to meet Zack, who remembers all of the events of the past clearly, at Gongaga, it would clarify fact from fiction before we even reach Cosmo Canyon. It doesn't seem it'd make for much of a mystery to base an entire installment of this trilogy around. Number 2. Zack saving Aerith before her death. While this is not impossible, it does reek of writers pandering to fans, and unless Zack joined the party earlier in Gongaga, I'm not sure what would motivate him to go from Midgar to the City of the Ancients when he, in theory, shouldn't really know enough about Aerith's whereabouts to point him in that direction. Number 3. Zack becoming the leader of the party after Cloud is lost in the livestream. This one theoretically makes sense. Replace Cloud with a Cloud-like character for gameplay reasons, but I still can't sort out why Zack would head to the Northern Crater and/or Midiel, or why the party would invite him in as the leader, especially if Aerith is dead. But even if Aerith were alive, simply saying, he's my ex and just like Cloud, to the rest of the team, seems like an unconvincing reason for him to take on Cloud's role. But where does that leave us? Well, rather than try to figure out the most optimal place for Zack to meet up with the party, why don't we just look at the details we do know? Number 1. Zack is on his way to Midgar. Number 2. He not only makes it to Midgar, but he makes it to Aerith's church, where Aerith is nowhere to be found. If you were Zack, what would you do next? Well, it might make the most sense to go see Elmira, to see if she knows if Aerith is okay, and maybe ask if she knows where Aerith is. At that point, where would Elmira likely point him? The Shinra building, where, as far as Elmira knows, Aerith is captured. She would have last spoken to Cloud and crew before they went to rescue Aerith, but wouldn't have heard anything about what happened, so naturally, Zack would follow that lead. The reason this is particularly interesting is because of the existence of the Yuffie DLC itself. As much as I love the DLC, there is an interesting fact about it that has bugged me for a while. Shortly after its reveal, Tetsuya Nomura clarified in an interview with Famitsu that they didn't originally plan to release downloadable content for FF7 Remake. Let's take Nomura at his word. It begs the question of why did the Yuffie DLC need to exist in the first place? While it is well done, it's not as if Yuffie is a fan favorite, and the plot revolves around the lore of Deepground, which was first established in the widely panned Dirge of Cerberus. While one explanation could be to set up Yuffie's arrival in the next game, her entry into the story was always a surprise, so setting her up doesn't seem that necessary. But what if the real reason was because it was necessary setup for an important story path in FF7 Rebirth? And with that, I introduce the Deepground Zack theory. It is my belief that Zack's story in Rebirth will largely take place in Midgar. As I already stated, after being unable to find Aerith, he'll head to her house to ask Elmyra about her whereabouts. In the process, he'll learn that Aerith had recently been captured by Shinra and her friends had gone on a mission to save her. Chasing this lead, he'll end up at the Shinra building and stumble upon Deepground, where he will probably have to contend with Nero, a potentially corrupted Sonon, and perhaps even Genesis. This would explain why there is a desire to re-release Crisis Core and reboot Genesis in the minds of fans. Now, it's certainly not a perfect theory, and I'm not sure if it's enough for the totality of Rebirth, but it would involve giving Zack a logical path forward in his quest to find Aerith and possibly derail him long enough for the general story beats from the original to play out, namely the all-important plotline of Cloud eventually losing his mind as the cliffhanger for Rebirth and recovering it early in Part 3. This could set up a couple of options for the final game. If Zack is still waylaid in Midgar, he could end up running into the party during their return visit to the city toward the end of the story. Doing so could even result in a bit of a mind break for Cloud, even after his memories have been restored. In his mind, he would believe that Zack is dead, but suddenly be confronted with Zack in person, alive. That could provide another bit of internal crisis that could yield some more drama. Presuming Cloud works through that or has it explained in some way, say by visiting Bugenhagen, they could exchange what they both learned throughout their individual journeys in regards to what is happening to the timeline and how to defeat Sephiroth once and for all. Alternatively, it could set him out on an entirely different path after escaping the Shinra building. If he ran into Sonon, it could lead him to Wutai, which was only an optional city in the original, and a location that I think is a prime candidate for Part 3 material. There aren't a ton of obvious reasons to head to Wutai in Part 2, aside from further Yuffie backstory, and considering the new logical endpoint for Rebirth is as far as the Northern Crater, there is a lot to cover in just one game. But if Zack were to confront Sonon in Deepground, it could provide some reason to head to Wutai after leaving the Shinra building. And it may be there that he runs into the party whenever the story sends him there. Now, my sixth sense is that this theory will not be very well liked, but hear me out. It may not, on the surface, feel like the most satisfying usage of Zack for fans hungry to see him meet Aerith, or for some reason undermine the Cloud-Sephiroth mind control conflict, but it makes a lot of sense for why they've reintroduced so many Shinra elements in between Remake and Rebirth, from the Yuffie DLC to the re-release of Crisis Core. And it doesn't stop them from using Zack in Part 3 in a way that satisfies fans. For example, if Zack were to meet up with Cloud after his memories have been restored, it could open up whole new possibilities. In Maximilian Dude's recent theory videos about Rebirth, he lays out an interesting outline for how the developers might flesh out Part 3's journey into something bigger.
And what's the way you make Part 3 fucking sick? How do you make Part 3 better than Part 2 of Final Fantasy VII? How do you make the third chapter eclipse the second chapter? Make it all about finding Cloud, getting him back, restoring his memory. We're back, baby. Let's go kick some ass. And now on the planet is all these ridiculous creatures, these giant weapons that are roaming around, and we have to take them out. But guess what? We're too weak to take them out. There's no way we can stop these giant hundreds of foot tall creatures that are trying to like stop the Earth from being destroyed. So what does the party have to do? You visit the ancient caves littered throughout the world. You breed chocobos to travel to those places all around the world. Now your globetrotting adventure becomes a search for the knowledge of the ancients, right? So now that is part 3. Now we're like, now that what's it called? A character is gone that has no connection to the Cetra or the ancients anymore. Now we have to find a way to make a connection with them to go find all of the crazy ass materia that is like across the planet that'll help us fight these giant things, if not potentially save us from Sephiroth. Part 3 will all be about that. And that's how you expand like a part 3 to make it something way more than what, you know, disc 3 was in FF7 original, and to have it feel super unique.
If Zack were involved in that journey, it could open the door for him doing things like leading a second party in those epic kaiju fights. Or perhaps Zack and Cloud could lead different expeditions to discover ancient knowledge. This is where things could really get interesting. What if, as they go on this search for the knowledge of the ancients, they discover a way to revive Aerith? I am of the opinion that Aerith needs to die, because her death is, as Max once called it, the emotional resonance of Final Fantasy VII. But I am open to Part 3 blowing open all new possibilities for the ending, including her revival. So while I think Zack will definitely end up meeting the main party at some point, I believe it would be likely to be in Part 3 after Cloud has gone through his mind journey. In the meantime, Zack could be used to unpack more secrets about Shinra and the lore of the world in a journey that will ultimately result in him meeting the party and impacting the story's endgame in a way that pays off why they went through so much trouble to defeat the, well, ghost of Christmas future. In doing so, they could deliver an unknown journey that will impact the overall story without completely undoing the core conflict of Cloud's, well, clouded memory and how it ends up being exploited by Sephiroth in a plan to doom the world. And that's it for the Deepground Zack theory. Let me know what you think about it. Would that be an interesting way to use Spin Rebirth? Drop a comment below, and if you enjoyed the video, I would very much appreciate if you could hit the like button to help other people find it, and click on the subscribe button and the little alert bell if you'd like to be notified whenever I post something new. So with that, keep gaming, gamers. I really need to figure out a sign off.